Excellencies, colleagues and friends, having witnessed the United Nations work throughout his life, His Majesty the King has asked me to offer a personal message of his congratulations to the UN on its 80th anniversary.
Before we dive into what might be the most eyebrow-raising political maneuver of the year, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you about David Lammy and his cozy arrangements with some rather powerful friends is exactly the kind of story the establishment hopes you'll scroll past. And if you enjoy holding our politicians to account with a side of British wit, you'll want to stay tuned to this channel. Now, whilst Keir Starmer has been busy reassuring the nation about Labour's squeaky clean commitment to transparency and ethical governance, his Foreign Secretary has been quietly orchestrating something rather extraordinary. David Lammy, the man entrusted with representing Britain's interests on the global stage, is facing the very real prospect of legal action. And no, it's not over some minor diplomatic faux pas or a poorly worded tweet. This is about bringing the boardrooms of Shell and BAE Systems directly into the corridors of Whitehall power. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine walking into the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, that bastion of British diplomacy, and finding executives from an oil giant sitting in on policy meetings about climate commitments, or defense contractors influencing decisions about arms exports to conflict zones. Sounds like a plot from a political thriller, doesn't it? Except this isn't fiction. This is David Lammy's grand plan for modernizing British foreign policy, and environmental campaigners are preparing to drag him into court over it. The scheme, which Lammy first floated in March during a speech at the Chambers of Commerce, sounds reasonable enough on paper. Exchange programs, commercial experience for diplomats, bringing private sector expertise into government. Very sensible, very pragmatic, very 21st century. But here's where it gets deliciously problematic. We're not talking about tech startups or renewable energy innovators. We're talking about Shell, a fossil fuel behemoth with a carbon footprint larger than most nations, and BAE Systems, a defense contractor whose weapons have found their way into some of the world's most troubling conflicts. The Corner House, an environmental organization that clearly hasn't received the memo about keeping quiet and playing nice, has had enough. They've instructed Lead Day solicitors to fire off a pre-action letter that essentially tells Lammy, explain yourself, or we'll see you in court. The allegations are serious enough to make any civil servant reach for the ministerial code. We're talking potential breaches of human rights obligations, conflicts of interest, and that wonderfully British phrase, improper influence. Nicholas Hildyard, founder of the Corner House, didn't mince his words. He called the scheme a recipe for serious conflicts of interest, and is not wrong to raise an eyebrow. Both Shell and BAE Systems have faced accusations of human rights violations. Shell's track record in Nigeria alone could fill several legal textbooks. BAE's controversies span continents and decades. And now Lammy wants to hand them government passes and desk space in one of Britain's most sensitive ministries. But wait, it gets better. In his letter to Royal Swan, Shell's chief executive, obtained through a Freedom of Information request because transparency is apparently now something we have to fight for, Lammy waxed lyrical about shared endeavors. He spoke of his ambassadors being tasked with helping British companies land contracts and overcome market barriers. Because nothing says diplomatic neutrality quite like turning our foreign service into a corporate sales force. Lammy told The Times he'll always put the economic interests of British workers first. Noble sentiment. Truly. But here's the uncomfortable question nobody seems to want to ask. When did defending British workers become synonymous with giving Shell and BAE Systems the keys to the foreign policy shop? Are we to believe that what's good for fossil fuel executives and arms dealers is automatically good for the plumber in Plymouth or the teacher in Tyneside? The FCDO's response has been predictably bureaucratic. They are striking new partnerships with British businesses, harnessing expertise, championing interests overseas. All perfectly anodyne phrases designed to make you feel like this is business as usual. They even pointed out that secondments between civil service and private sector are commonplace. And they are right. They are commonplace. But there's a world of difference between sending a diplomat to learn about fintech at a startup and embedding a Shell executive in policy discussions about climate commitments. The legal letter raises three particularly thorny issues. First, There's the alleged lack of transparency. We don't really know how this scheme will operate, who decides which companies get access, what safeguards exist, or how conflicts will be managed. It's all rather opaque for a government that promised to govern by daylight. Second, there's a potential for improper influence. When Shell staff are sitting in on Foreign Office meetings, are they observers or participants? Are they learning or lobbying? Third, there are the conflict of interest that don't just raise red flags, they wave them enthusiastically while setting off sirens. What makes this particularly galling is the timing. We're living through a climate emergency. Britain has committed to net zero. We've hosted COP summits. We've lectured other nations about their fossil fuel dependencies. And simultaneously, our foreign secretary wants to give one of the world's largest oil companies direct access to the machinery of British diplomacy. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. And then there's the BAE Systems element. Britain's arms export policies are already controversial. We've faced repeated criticism over sales to Saudi Arabia, which uses British weapons in Yemen. Parliamentary committees have wrung their hands over due diligence processes. And now we're considering letting BAE staff shape the very policies they're supposed to be regulated by. It's like appointing foxes as poultry farm consultants and expecting the chickens to be thrilled about it. What's remarkable about this story is how it encapsulates everything that's wrong with Britain's revolving door between government and corporate interests. We've normalized a system where former ministers glide into lucrative consultancies and corporate executives pop into government to share expertise. We've convinced ourselves this is about efficiency and knowledge transfer, not about influence peddling and regulatory capture. Lammy's defenders will argue this is about competitiveness, about understanding business, about ensuring British companies thrive in a tough global market. And there's a kernel of truth there. Britain does need to understand how business works in the real world. But there's a difference between understanding business and becoming an extension of corporate PR departments. There's a difference between supporting British industry and becoming their lobbyist-in-chief. The real question is what kind of foreign policy this scheme will produce. Will our diplomats prioritize human rights or Shell's quarterly profits? When British ambassadors meet foreign governments, will they represent British values or BAE's sales targets? When push comes to shove and there's a choice between ethical foreign policy and commercial advantage, which way will the scales tip? Shell disputes the claims of wrongdoing. Naturally, they always do. BAE Systems was approached for comment, but seems to have decided silence is golden. And Lammy is defending this as putting British workers first, as if we're all too dim to see the sleight of hand. What's particularly frustrating is how this could have been handled differently. If Labour genuinely wanted to improve commercial expertise in the civil service, there are countless ways to do it without triggering legal threats. Bring in experts from ethical businesses. Create advisory panels with proper safeguards. Invest in training programs. But no, we've gone straight for the most controversial option, almost as if someone wanted to test just how much the British public will tolerate. This story is about more than just David Lammy or Labour's approach to corporate Britain. It's about what we accept as normal in our democracy. It's about whether we believe there should be clear lines between public service and private profit. It's about whether we think the Foreign Office should represent British interests or corporate interests, and whether we're still naive enough to believe those are always the same thing. The legal action, if it proceeds, will be fascinating. The courts will have to grapple with questions about ministerial discretion, civil service independence, and the boundaries of acceptable corporate influence. Win or lose, the case will shine a light on practices that have flourished in the shadows for far too long. Here's the uncomfortable truth. This scheme probably won't be stopped. Legal challenges take time. Political will is lacking. And by the time anyone could intervene effectively, the secondments will be underway and the precedent set. That's how these things work. You propose something controversial, weather the initial storm, and then normalize it through sheer persistence. But that doesn't mean we should accept it without question. That doesn't mean we should shrug and move on. Because every time we allow another boundary to be crossed, every time we normalize another conflict of interest, we diminish our democracy just a little bit more. We move further from the ideal of public service and closer to a system where government exists primarily to facilitate corporate interests. David Lammy might believe is modernizing the Foreign Office, bringing it into the 21st century, making it more commercially savvy. But what he's actually doing is opening a door that should have remained firmly shut. And once that door is open, once Shell and BAE Systems have their people embedded in Whitehall, it'll be nearly impossible to close it again. The real scandal isn't just that this is happening. It's that in modern Britain, in Starmer's supposedly reformist Labour government, nobody in power seems to think there's anything particularly wrong with it. That's how far we've drifted from basic standards of public accountability. That's how normalized corporate capture has become. And that, my friends, is why you need to keep coming back to this channel. Because whilst the mainstream media might report these stories, we're here to connect the dots, to ask the uncomfortable questions, and to refuse to accept that this is just how things are done. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's keep holding power to account, one scandal at a time. See you in the next one.